emission standards. So what do you mean by emission standards? Emission standards are the requirements that set specific limits to the amount of pollutant that can be released by a vehicle into the environment. Okay, so every government will set certain norms. Okay, the vehicle should emit only that up to that degree of pollutants. If it is more than that pollution, then the vehicle will not be fit for operation. Okay. So this emission norms will be set by various countries as per their convenience. The most popular one is the Euro norms, European standards for emissions, because they were the earlier people who had set this norms. Okay. So even India is following the European norms only, but as it is, they are not using the straight away. For the Indian conditions, they are doing some modifications. Okay, taking European norms as a reference, and they are calling it as Bharat stage norms, BS norms. Okay, recently, you know that there was a very big surge in the industries, especially automotive industries, and associated component manufacturers were very highly affected in last one and a half year, and our economy was also affected. Why? Because of unplanned implementation of BS6 norms. Suddenly they stopped the BS4 norms vehicle. Okay, people expected BS5 norms will come into force. Okay, but directly by skipping BS5 in India, BS6 was directly implemented. If you just go through in Europe 2012-13 itself, Euro 5 norms were introduced. After that 5 to 6 years they took a break, and straight away they introduced the BS6 norms. But in India, what happened? BS5 4 norms was completely implemented throughout the country in 2017. Okay, so many manufacturers were expecting that BS5, that is little bit control. Say for example, carbon monoxide 12 ppm is there, it may be reduced to 11 in BS5, but that didn't happen. Directly from BS4, within a short span of 2 to 3 years, BS6 was implemented. Okay, which was almost equivalent to Euro 6 norms. So to meet that standards, okay, the entire plant of the automobile company should have been altered. That was the major issue. It required lot of investment. Also, the plant was closed for 2 to 3 months. Okay. So the engine has to be modified, emissions catalytic converter has to be modified to meet those stringent norms. So because of that, many industries was closed for a long period of time, and there was a lot of associated problems, because the automotive is one of the major structure of an industries. Yeah. If one of the automobile factories, say Maruti Suzuki, is closed, you may feel that one industry. It is not so. Okay, Maruti is a brand name, but in manufacturing a vehicle, each and every component will be given to many sub suppliers. Many clamps will be there, chassis will be there, battery, so on. Many thousands of components will be there. So they will be given as a subcontract to many companies. So last time for final year students, I had taken them to an industrial visit, so to a nearby company. Yeah, it was a forging and foundry company, but they were official suppliers for Ford. Okay, 5 to 6 components of every Ford vehicle, like brakes, okay, and brake related components, then seat belts, seat belt clamps, okay, and seat mounting clamps for the automobile. All those parts were manufactured by that company. Okay, once Ford is closed, all these associate companies, there will be no orders and there will be a issue. So this was a problem because in India, okay, because of stringent emission standards. Okay. So this vehicle emission performance standard will be set by those particular countries. Okay, emission performance standard is, it will set a limits, okay, up to which the emission can be given by a vehicle. Okay. So Bharat stage, we'll discuss about BS norms first. Bharat stage emission standards are the emission standards instituted by Government of India to regulate the output of air pollutants from an engine. Okay, the standards and the timeline for implementation are set by the. So who will set the standard? It will be sent. It will be set by PCB, Pollution Control Board, Central Pollution Control Board. Okay, which works under the Ministry of Environment and Forests. Okay, so this board is responsible for assessing every situation and setting certain norms. Then these norms will be implemented by Government of India. So usually it will be done like this. First they bring these norms into metropolitan cities, okay, major cities in the country. Then it will be extended throughout the India. Okay, initially only automobile cars, okay, it has to follow. Next, when it is brought throughout the country, then trucks, tractors, every automobile has to be followed. Okay, if you just see the timeline how the, or overview of the emission norms which are there in India. So in 1991, even though cars and two-wheelers entered into the country in early 80s, first 10 to 12 years there was no question of any emission norms, no question of emission testing. In 1991, yeah, ideal CO limits, carbon monoxide limits. So many people started discussing about the vehicular emissions that are causing a problem to the atmosphere. So then in 1991, for the very first time, carbon monoxide limits, okay, was first set for diesel vehicles, and mass emissions, total emissions put together, COH, NOx, etc. Certain values were fixed for petrol vehicles, whereas for diesel vehicles, okay, smoke and CO limits were set. To start with, in 1991, for diesel vehicles, carbon monoxide and smoke limits were set, whereas for gasoline vehicles, mass emission norms, that is total emissions, was set. In 1992, mass emission norms were introduced for diesel vehicles. The total emission was fixed to certain value. Okay, in 1996, okay, revision was made for this mass emission norms. Okay, in 96, already 15 years were up. Okay, once the automobile industry entered into India, there was huge pollution. Okay, this whatever mass emission norms were there, that was made very stringent, and use of a catalytic converter for cars was mandatory. In earlier vehicles there was no any I was discussing in the last class about catalytic converter. Yeah, so if you just see underneath of a vehicle, you can see a box. From the box outlet there will be a silencer. In that box there will be a set of meshes called as catalytic converters. We have discussed in the last class how it works, what are the different catalysts used. Yeah. So up to 96, there was no such catalytic converters used in any vehicles. Whatever emittents come out of the vehicle, they were directly let into the atmosphere. So in 96, in India, catalytic converter was made mandatory. Without catalytic converter, no vehicle, whether it is a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler, it should not be run. Okay, in 1998 was the very first time cold start norms were introduced. Earlier it was there for only foreign countries, but in India also it was felt necessary in certain parts of the country. The vehicle has to be designed such that even in cold start conditions, you should be able to start it easily. Okay. In 2000, for the very first time, there was a major reform. Okay. Equivalent to Euro 1 norms, Bharat Stage 2 norms was very first introduced. Yeah. So Euro 1 norms was taken as a reference. They named it as BS2 norms. Whatever earlier they did in 96, 98, it was assumed as BS1 norms. Okay. In 2000, they took a major decision and implemented Bharat Stage 2 norms as a trial in only Delhi, in the capital city. Okay, vehicles entering into Delhi should meet those norms. They should get the emission tested, and emission certificate should be there with them. Then in 2001, Bharat Stage 2, which was equivalent to Euro 2 norms. Okay, that is whatever BS2 norms was there in 2000. Yeah, that was little bit relaxed one. Okay, but in 2001, more stringent, which was equivalent to Euro 2 norms. Okay, was implemented for all metropolitan cities, 13 cities across the country. It was implemented. Okay, 2003, as I told you, it was implemented in 2003 for all the 13 cities. Okay, in 2005, okay, Euro 3 norms were taken as reference, and BS3 norms was framed and it was implemented. In 2010, BS4 norms was implemented. So this was the timeline. Okay, so 2000 they started with BS2 norms. 2003 up to 2005 there was no revisions. This was a major problem. 5 years they left free. Okay, huge pollution started entering. In 2005, BS3 norms came into picture. In 5 years gap, in 2010 BS3 norms were completed, and BS4 equivalent to Euro 4 norms was implemented. Then suddenly from April 2010, where BS4 norms were implemented in the 13 cities, there was no revision in the pollution norms. Okay, in up to 2017, for a period of 7 years, same old BS4 norms were there. By that time, European countries had set in 2013-14, they entered into Euro 5 norms. Then in 2017-18, they came into Euro 6 norms. Stage by stage, they transformed. Okay, but what happened in India is in 2010 BS4 was implemented. Up to 17, there was no question of any changes. Okay, and in 17 somewhere they announced BS5 would be skipped. Why? Because there was a huge lag, and BS5 will not work to control the pollutions. Directly in 2020 they implemented BS6 norms. which caused lot of disturbance. I can give you one simple example. Okay. Now what happens, we are discussing a subject called automobile engineering. I will not conduct any examinations, nothing, I leave it as such. At the end of your 7th semester, there will be already 6 or 7 subjects of 7th semester. Suddenly I will announce an exam for automobile engineering and other subjects also. So what happens, you will be heavily loaded, correct? So similar way, for 10 years total free setting was there. Stage by stage transformation did not take place. Once for all, BS6 was straight away, stringent norms were given out. So that was the reason where you will be hearing about GDP. Okay, GDP fell down, Indian economy went very much lower because of this unbalanced norms. So this will give you a timeline how does emission norms in India varied. Okay, so just you need to remember certain years, and they may ask you to write the overview of emission norms in India. You may have to reproduce it. Okay, next. So just we will see some values what were set in the previous norms. In 1991, as I told you, BS1 was implemented. Okay, for passenger cars. So whatever table we are seeing, it is exclusively for petrol cars. Okay, CO. Okay, carbon monoxide was set in between 14.3 to 27.1, anywhere in this limit. HC plus NOx put together up to 2 was allowed. In 1996, you can see it was made a little bit stringent. The ratio was reduced from 8.68 to 12.4. HC and NOx were a little bit increased. Why? Because it was not possible to design engine in that range. Okay. In 1998, they made it very stringent, 4 to 6 CO, HC and NOx put together 1.5 to 2. You can see, if you want to suddenly reduce the emissions by so much, engine design should be very much changed. Okay, and the cost of the vehicle also goes up. Okay, in 2000, for the first time, stage norms concept they brought. Whatever 91, 96, 98 concept was there, they all concluded it and called it as BS1, wherein CO was 2.72, HC plus NOx was set in the range of 1. Then thereon it combined. It changed very drastically. Bharat stage 2, as we discussed, it came into picture in 2002. Next, Bharat stage 3 in 2005, Bharat stage 4 in 2010. So similarly, in 2013 or 14, if BS5 would have been implemented in the country, so much turbulence would not have been there. Okay, stage by stage transformation might have occurred. Okay. But in our country, from 2010, there was no revision for a decade. In 2020, directly they skipped BS5 and they entered into BS6. So, okay. So this will give you an idea. See, initially, okay, the HC plus NOx was allowed up to 4.36 grams for every kilometer driven. Okay. In BS4, it is 0.18. In BS6, it is less than 0.1. So if you want to design from this to this, there is a good amount of cost and research involved. Okay. Similarly, for 2 and 3 wheelers, various stages were set. Okay. Next, for diesel vehicles and heavy diesel vehicles, these were the norms: CO, HC, NOx, and particulate matter. Here, smoke or particulate matter is an additional component. You can just compare the ranges. In 91, up to 14 grams for every kilowatt hour of power generated, it was allowed. Now, currently in BS4, that is in 2010, only 1.5 grams per kilowatt hour was allowed. Okay, it was very stringent. Now, this is the real picture. This is the 2020 picture I have taken from a newspaper cutting. Okay, so BS6 was directly implemented, which is almost same as the Euro 6. Okay, it was directly copied. CO was for petrol cars, HC was reduced to 0.1. In 2010, up to 0.2 was allowed. Suddenly, it is reduced by half. NOx was allowed up to 0.18. Suddenly, it is reduced to 0.06. That is 60% reduction. Particulate matter was a huge issue. Okay, 0.005 from 0.2. It was reduced almost 20-fold. So this will give you a BS6 norm data set by the Indian government. Okay. So what you have to do is certain facts and figures you have to remember. They may ask for 5 to 6 marks about the overview of emission norms in the country. You should be able to reproduce it. Okay, just we'll have a brush up on European emission standards. Okay, European emission standards define the acceptable limits for exhaust emissions. Okay, they also consider NOx, total hydrocarbon, that is HC emissions. Okay, non-methane hydrocarbons, they split HC into two, NMHC and THC. But in our country, they both put together are called as HC. CO, particulate matter in case of diesel engines. for most of the vehicles. For each vehicle type, okay, they define it. You see, you cannot set a common standard for all type of vehicles. Whenever the load is more on the vehicle, definitely the emissions vary. Okay, so for each different type of vehicle, Europeans have set certain standards. Now we can just see here, if we discuss this, we will get an idea what was the implementation issues in our country, how it was implemented in Europe, why it went smoothly, how it was implemented in India, why didn't it go smoothly. Okay. So here, this is the legal framework that is described in the European countries. Okay. So the stages are typically referred as Euro 1, Euro 2, Euro 3, etc. Okay. The is in 1993 they implemented